Welcome to the Purdue Extension Crop and Weather Update for May 21st, 2024. These updates are here to help growers make informed decisions throughout the season.
My name is Jeff Burbrink, LaGrange County, and I'm on the Field Crops Focus Group. We can start off with Shaun Casteel.
Soybean front. A lot has changed in a quick fashion here. So we've come into summer, 85, 90-degree days, and these fields have been drying out. Now, there's certainly been pockets of the state that haven't, but when you look at the state level, we're right on track in terms of soybean planting progress. As of the 20th of May, about 49%, give or take. And so that's right on track for the 5-year average. Certainly not as fast as what we did last year in 23. 23 was one of the fastest ones on record. So I'd say that after a lot of waiting and pausing, beans have been in the ground quickly. There are pockets that are just now probably starting to roll. So I think of areas like the Northeast and the Southeast have had a lot more rains and these unstable air conditions where you catch a popcorn shower that dumps a half an inch to 2 inches. So we have the other fields that haven't been planted. Several things that come to my mind with the field conditions and the weather. These 85-degree temperatures, 90s. I mean, heat units are high, and so these beans are getting out of the ground fast. So once they got in the ground, they had adequate moisture and good heat. They're coming out of the ground in 7 days, and so these beans are looking good. I think what's been nice about the recent plantings has been the temperature and the moisture, and then in that these beans are growing fast, so then they're able to metabolize any of the trees that are down. I haven't seen too many calls on that. A lot of the earlier plantings we tend to think about they're growing slowly, they're not able to metabolize all the herbicide properly or effectively, I guess is the best way to put it, and then in that you have some injury that can kind of come through that. So there is some good that's there. We are starting to dry out in spots too, right? So there's going to be this variable seed moisture on the other half of the crop that needs to be planted. So hopefully we're planting in the moisture. But as it dries out on top, there is going to be this variation. And so be mindful of those growers that are maybe pushing field conditions. Hey, I got a lot to put in, and they're not closing the rows. This is the time period that if they're not doing a good job closing the row, and it stays the nice 85, 90-degree weather without rain to kind of level everything off, I think you could start to see some stand issues, some emergence issues that could come out of it. So just be mindful of basically this week and next week's plantings if they don't catch the rains after that, if they have to be pushing it. So the other 50%. So we're within the next 2 weeks of going out doing stand count, seeing where everything's at. Usually I'd like to look at that as soon as you have the unifoliates out. So you're cracking right now, you got another few days for the cotyledons and unifoliates to fully expand. That's VC. By the time we're VC to V1, one trifoliate expanded, we really need to make that call of, okay, do I need to do any overseeding or not? Soybeans usually have the ability to handle any replant that's more of an overseeding instead of a tear out and replant. So just be mindful of that, do your stand counts and catch them from there. We're shooting for 120,000 plants, but in reality, if we have 70 to 80,000, that's probably still going to be good enough, especially when we think about the opportunities for any replant or overseeding to establish in a timely fashion. I would much rather stay with that 70, 80,000 stand if that's what you've got than to replant and tear over at the end of May. Another question that's come across my doorstep here has been what's getting planted this week and next week. Do we need to be talking about changing seeding rates? And at this point, no. All right, the 20th of May into next week, Memorial Days happen a little bit early for us this year, right? So May 26th, 27th, that area. You know, by the end of May, I think I talk about the idea of increasing seeding rates, but if you're on this typical 140,000 seeding rate with the planter 15s or 30s, you're going to be fine, assuming it's a 90% germ. And then after that, when you get in the first week of June, is when I say, I think we need to have more plants out there on an area basis because we're going to have these plants produce fewer trifoliate nodes. And so that's a place where you might start increasing. So in another couple of weeks, if you still haven't got the fields planted, probably increase it on the order of another 10,000 seeds. The other question that's very similar to this is a lot of guys have been cutting back their seeding rates even below that 140. They've been kind of, hey, I think I can thread the needle. And again, soybeans can do a lot with this 110,000, 120,000. So the question might be, do I need to change my seeding rate with that as my starting point? And I think this one is going to be field by field condition. So if you've got adequate soil moisture, we certainly have the temperatures and you can get a good soil to seed contact. I think even if they're kind of threading the needle a little bit, 110, 120, they're probably going to be fine for this week. If they're going in the week of Memorial Day and they're still on that number and they're, let's say, using an early maturing line, that's definitely going to need some more seeds out there, more plants to push those first pods higher. So those are the main things that come to my mind at this point with the way seasons opened up and the way the planting's progressing. So I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you for getting that kicked off for us there, Shaun. I think I'll go ahead and have Darcy talk now since she's got a deadline coming up on her and tell us a little bit about the disease situation.
Well, I think, Jeff, right now, as for diseases, I guess I would keep an eye on wheat. We did have some higher risks for wheat scab to develop this month. If you look at the map, we turn kind of orange-red in some areas. So if we're at flowering, we might have had some infection there. So if they haven't sprayed, I guess I look at where you are on flowering for the central northern part of the state. In southern Indiana, I know our wheat is starting to mature. We're at dough stage or ish. We're going to go right next. Actually, we're right in Thursday, so we'll see what happens. But I guess that's the time as you see this wheat start to mature. It's time to get out and look and see if you see any of those bleached heads where there might be some infection with scab. We're also watching for stripe rust. So we do see that the spores have moved across the United States. There's reports up in Michigan and Ontario. I've only had one sample come in from our own plants here at Acre. I may know more tomorrow when I get down, or Thursday when I get down south. But just be on the watch for rusts. I'd be interested if you see any rusts in wheat, whether it's stripe, common, or stem rust. We're looking for all of them just to document that or other diseases. Right now, it's just watching our stands come up of corn and soybeans. If you do see stand issues and you're wondering if it's a pathogen related issue, I do suggest sending samples into John at the PPDL to determine what the cause is. Right now, I've run a little of our data where we've done some seed treatment stands where we planted at the end of April and then had those cold, wet weathers. Right now, I don't see much difference, but we'll see what happens as we get more crops out of the ground. So right now, relatively quiet on the disease front.
Any questions for Darcy? Thanks for joining us today, Darcy. Have fun today.
Yep.
Okay, Keith Johnson, you're on the call. What you got for us today on forages?
Well, good morning, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well. So just a few things that come to mind after this first harvest has occurred.
I gotta go.
Jeff, you wrote a really nice article that showed in Morning Ag Clips, and I followed that with the Pest and Crop newsletter. You know, we really need to keep our eyes on the temperature of the hay and storage. And guidelines are in the recent Pest and Crop newsletter from last week. But getting up to 125 degrees Fahrenheit is not unusual, fairly common. Even, kind of think that's pretty warm, but we do have some respiration still going on in that plant and as it goes through that curing process. The point is that once we get above 125 degrees Fahrenheit, probably going to have some mold issues, but we can lead to spontaneous combustion and some hay fires. And that happens, fairly routinely every year that there's going to be a couple of incidences of that. So I think it's really important to understand that monitoring hay and storage is more than just a few days. It seems like the fires that happen are probably about 3 to 4 weeks after baling has occurred. The other thing is now that we have first harvest pretty much accomplished regarding hay crops, this is an ideal to think about the fertilization program that's needed. We want to do that based on soil test for sure. And one of the things that I find happens too often is I'm not a fan of the triple products, 12, 12, 12, 19, 19, 19. You're going to find that you're under fertilizing or over fertilizing with that type of product. And so I think we definitely need to be more prescriptive based on soil testing. I'm going to try to share my screen here now, see what we can do. Let's see. Okay. So Christian, I see you're on, and I will let you give the full load since this is really your discipline. But I do think this is a time of year now that we've transitioned from alfalfa weevil being concerned to this pest, potato leafhopper. Believe me, it's not that large. It's about the size of a pencil lead is the size of this adult that we're seeing, and it's an incomplete metamorphosis, so there's nymphs. But I would really encourage you, my message to you is that if you do not have a sweep net available to go out to fields and verify if there's an economic threshold on this pest to do so. It's a 15-inch diameter sweep net that's needed based on the research that was done. That was what they used to verify economic thresholds. So encourage you to start watching for this particular insect. And again, I would say on alfalfa that's been harvested just recently, make sure you check regrowth to make sure that the adults are not feeding on the crop. I'm going to do another share here. Okay, share screen. So what does the damage look like? It's essentially, we've got this situation where the insect places its proboscis, its mouthpiece right here at this point. It injects a toxin, and the classic is this yellow V that you see, but it also can be a bronzish type of color that you see. By the time you see this damage, it really is really too late to be thinking about an insecticide application. The other message I would give to you from an agronomist standpoint is that I really believe in the research that has been done with potato leafhopper resistant alfalfa. And if people are procrastinating and doing any scouting to verify with susceptible varieties as to whether a harvest or an insecticide should be used, I really think that's an ideal thing to consider. And there are several good varieties that are adapted to Indiana that we can select to ward off this particular insect. Okay. The other thing I just want to say is that the other thing that's on the alert, and Christian, I want you to be aware of this too, is sugarcane aphid. This is a pest of sorghum. We have seen this for the last 4 or 5 years at the Feld and Purdue Ag Center. They're raising forage sorghum as a alternative to corn as a silage. There are varieties or hybrids that are resistant to this particular pest, but it's a typical looking aphid, but it can really cause some damage to sorghum if we're not on the watch. The other thing that I want to note is that I had a email from one of your colleagues this past week about pasture rent, and I just want to make sure that you know that within the Forage Field Guide, which I hope all of you have gotten. If you've not gotten the 4th edition, I really would encourage you to do so because there's some updates in there that I think you'll find useful. I think you'll find it useful in your day-to-day job. But there's a pasture rent, how to calculate in that Forage Field Guide. And I know lots of you get questions on what should the pasture rent be. And so there's different guidelines on how to do that. I'm going to try to share a screen again and see if it's there. There we go. Okay. So I want to make reference to this hay quality contest. This is going to come out with a news release in the next week or so, so that'll make it easy for you to understand the full details. It's coming out from Ag Communication. But really good response from sponsorships this year. I'm thrilled that we have responses from livestock organizations, a seed company, SureTech Laboratories has given us a reduced price for this. Hudson is a John Deere dealership, and this is being, essentially sponsored, organized, I should say, by the Indiana Forage Council. So look for details on this. I'm really excited that more than just doing the analysis and telling individuals about the results, we plan to follow this up with a mid-fall type of learning event on how do we go about raising high quality hay. And at that particular event, we'll share the results of this contest. So a lot of great opportunities for that. Would like to see the number of samples larger than what we did when we had it 2 years ago, which was, it was a quorum, but would like to have more and more involvement. So with that, are there any questions for me that are problematic that you're finding or concerns?
We had a pasture walk up here the other day, Keith, and we did see the weevils were going into their pupa phase. So things are winding down on the weevils.
Yeah, I presume that. Thank you for your Northern Indiana observance of that. So that probably means it's done and passed in the Ohio River Valley. Well, thank you very much.
Keith.
You bet. Have a good day, everybody.
Okay. I did receive a note from Dan Quinn. He's not going to be able to do it because he's in the middle of a diagnostic training at this point in time. He did say he's seeing no major issues in corn. There has been some spotty replants around the state and in just a few areas. Planting progress has caught up. We're right now at the 5-year average, which is pretty incredible considering where we were just 3 weeks ago. So that's our message from Dan Quinn, our corn specialist. Marguerite, I saw that you were on. Do you have anything you want to share today?
Yeah, I have just a very brief update and we can move on. We haven't planted our hemp out at the agronomy farm yet. We're hoping the end of this week we can get it in. But one of our growers that is participating in a USDA trial planted last week in Columbia City, and his hemp is up and it looks very healthy. And we have a couple other growers that should be planting this week or next. But the update I wanted to give that hopefully people will come out and attend is our July 30th field day. So we'll have a field day focused on hemp out at the Agronomy Center for Research and Education. We'll highlight our USDA trials. So we have lots of varieties included. We'll have a nitrogen fertility trial, and then we'll have some folks from various departments talking about pest management and diagnostics in hemp, as well as our food science department talking about some of the work they're doing. So I'd really encourage folks to come out. We'll have a registration link, hopefully end of this week or next week, for people to just come and learn about hemp. I know we don't have as much production as we have in past years, but I still am getting calls from growers, from educators, from people out of state about this crop. So hopefully I see some of you out at our field day.
Lyndon, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, just a couple quick words. I really like Beth Hall's weather that she's been providing. That rain a couple times a week, keep things going, keep us from having to get the irrigation equipment out. But it will come to a day that we're going to be dry. I was out at Purdue yesterday and drove by a 12-bottom plow plowing down rye up to my waist when I was taking pictures. And I was surprised how dry the ground was underneath that. If it stops raining, irrigators are going to be thinking about how to water up crops and water in herbicides and nitrogen. There's a nice little article I just put in the chat if you get to that point. And then the last issue, about 10 days ago, we had a huge storm come through southwest Michigan. It damaged about 0.5% of our equipment, which means about 60 total replacement units going in. And this will affect Indiana because I see a lot of your dealerships up here doing work for the local people. And what that means is make sure to if you have any repair work, make sure to get it on the list because there may not be as many repair people in your area as you think because they're up here helping me. So make sure the equipment's ready to run so there's no surprises the last minute. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Lyndon. If there's no questions for Lyndon, I'm going to go ahead and move to Christian Krupke because he's also going to be speaking at the diagnostic. training, and we need to get him worked in here.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, just a few updates. The first thing is following up on our alfalfa weevil conversation from last time. I met with my counterparts from the Midwest field crop entomologists. We talked about alfalfa weevil. I mentioned some of our observations and some of this, maybe thinking that resistance has crept over from the Western states to here. And my counterparts said they've seen something similar. Nobody has any data on it because it's not as easy as just, saying, hey, the spray didn't work. But what did come out of it is for next year, we'll do some collections and see what's going on, get a reference level for the various states and see if we've got some resistant alfalfa weevils. And what that entails is collecting some of the adults and larvae, putting them in little vials that are coated with insecticide, and then coating those vials with insecticide, putting them on a hot dog roller, basically to coat that entire vial with insecticide, and then you put the weevils in there and see how long they take to die. That's the way that we do it in terms of insecticide resistance monitoring. So that's the alfalfa weevil story. Of course, we're sort of done with that insect for now, for this year. With these temperatures in corn and soybean, as Shaun was saying, when the plants are growing like this and have lots of moisture and have lots of heat and sun and all these things, insects of course can't get as much of a foothold, especially in the spring. So we've got maximum conditions to facilitate outgrowing insect pests and basically blowing by those vulnerable plant stages and not sitting in those pre-germination and early plant stages too long. That's in the spring when we always worry, of course, about things like wireworms and seed corn maggots and white grubs and cutworms and all those early season pests. Keith mentioned potato leafhopper. That is a migratory pest, comes in to Indiana from the west, comes into a lot of our Midwestern states. So that's one that does require monitoring. It does require sweep net type of situation. So you cannot rely on past history. There's not a pheromone trap that's reliable for it. By the time you see that hopper burn, those sort of triangles of damage on the leaves, it's too late. You've already incurred damage. That won't come back. It won't grow out of it. Things like that. Of course, that's not and the reason that it causes damage is that part of the leaf is not photosynthetic. It's not absorbing light and energy and making carbohydrates and helping grow the plant and all that good stuff. So that's one that requires vigilance. Hot, dry conditions are what it likes because then the plant's resistance, its native resistance, its ability to repel the invasion decline when the plant is stressed. And that's true for many insect and plant interactions. I got a question about black cutworm, and I'll respond to that individual by email. But I thought it was worth mentioning briefly here, and what they observed was variable levels of control with neonicotinoid seed treatments. On sandy hills, higher levels of control possibly than on other areas. So the upshot of all this is that what we've seen when we've done any work with concentrations of neonicotinoids in plants is that it's very variable, and it depends on two main factors. Number one, the size of the plant. That's not surprising. The amount of neonicotinoid on the seed is fixed, and it only declines as the plant grows. So the ratio of insecticide to plant is lower with a larger plant. The second one that is more difficult to predict is the moisture of the surrounding soil. So if you get wet soils, we know you get more off-site movement, off-plant movement of that neonicotinoid. So it's not as reliably on the plant, near the plant, where the plant can take it up. So that's a big factor when you talk about a wet spot in the field versus a sort of a sandy hill in the field. You would expect to have variable control. Having said all that, for black cutworm, we have not seen good or reliable efficacy of the insecticide seed treatments. It's just doesn't seem to be sufficient on its own to provide that reliable control that you need or expect. By the time the plants are being cut, generally those insects are too large to be killed anyway. The hope is that you get them earlier with any control measures while they're still just notching leaves and things like that. But the short answer is that we don't expect good control with seed treatments, and we do expect variability in all cases with seed treatments as it relates to water content surrounding the seed and hydration of soils. And with this spring, I would think that would be especially true, where we had some pretty rainy intervals there, that if a corn plant was sitting in the ground, you would think that, you would definitely see some of the material be washed off the plant and away from the plant. Okay, I think those were the main things I wanted to cover today. As long as it stays warm and we get these timely rains, but not soaking wet fields, we would expect insects to be, relatively a back burner issue, but there's always the potential for something unforeseen to happen. I'll be happy to take any questions that have come up.
Are there any questions for Christian before we move on to Beth Hall? Okay, Beth, are you ready to talk about weather?
Let's go for it. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm just going to jump right in for the sake of time, do a quick overview to try and get a feel for what's been happening lately. So this is 3 maps showing the temperature the temperature departure over the last 30 days. So since about April 21st through yesterday, the map on the left is just average, and then the middle one is the average maximum temperature, and the far right is the average minimum temperature. I think the big takeaway here is it's been warm. It's been warm at the hottest time of the day, and it's been warm at the coldest time of the day by several degrees throughout the state during this time, and I'm sure you've all have felt that. Okay. Now I need to figure out how to go to the next slide. Okay, growing degree days. This should be no surprise because if it's been so warm, the map on the right shows how much ahead of average we are if we start the accumulation April 1st. And then the map on the left shows what those numbers are. I know that's important, particularly for things like pests and perhaps other planting decisions. But I was pretty surprised about how far ahead we are on the growing degree days. These are modified growing degree days, I'll also point out, meaning instead of just a base 50, we also cap it at 86 degrees Fahrenheit. Precipitation, when I was putting the presentation together, all I kept thinking is it has been wet. It has been so wet, and we're going to see that we are wetter than normal. So I was proven wrong by actually looking at the data. The map on the left shows us how much precipitation has fallen over the last 30 days. And you can see a lot of greens and blues, which is certainly expected. When I see numbers of 5 inches or more for the last 30 days, that seems like a lot to me. But the map in the middle shows, and how does this compare to normal? And we're using a 30-year period from 1991 to 2020 as our normal period. And you can see that where it's green, it's above normal. Where it's yellow, it's below normal. And I was surprised to see that not just slightly below normal, but 1 to 2 inches below normal in some areas. And the map on the right just puts that in terms of percent of normal, where if it was at 100%, that would be right at the normal amount for that 30-year period that we're comparing to. So I was surprised that I just assumed the whole state would have been some shade of green, but you can see, particularly the map on the right, when we're talking about those really faded yellows and faded greens, I don't consider those too alarming. I would say those are all pretty much around normal. But when we get to the next darker shade of green and darker shade of that orange, I was surprised to see, wow, that's a quite drier period that we've been looking at. I'm going to jump into the Purdue Mesonet products now, because I know several of you have mentioned soil moistures, and even Lyndon was saying how you just need to go down a little bit and things are dry. So as soon as we hit a dry period, we could be looking at concerns for irrigation. So first of all, I pulled this data around 7 o'clock yesterday just to give some temporal perspective. The map on the left is a 2-inch depth and the map on the right is the 4-inch depth. I'll also call out, we have a new station down in far southwestern Indiana, which brings our network to 15 stations across the Purdue Mesonet. In general, for most of the sites, if I see numbers around 30% moisture, I consider that to be good and healthy soil moisture. If it's below that and really not even too bad, but once we get below, say, 20 or 17%, that's when I start to pay close attention. However, the exceptions are the ASIL site up there between Marshall and Stark County, you see, is extraordinarily low. Right next to it at PPAC, and then down at Swaypack down in Knox County. Those stand out, but I will highlight that those are very sandy soils as compared to the rest of the sites. So they are still showing low amounts. PPAC, Swaypack, not too concerned about. ASIL, I'm keeping an eye on because it just seems suspiciously low. I just hit the next slide though, because this shows 8-inch depth and 20-inch depth on the left and the right respectively, just to get an idea of how far down that moisture goes. Again, for most of the sites, except for the ASIL site, it's looking very wet, very moist to me, which has helped in trying to determine what is our drought risk. Also, I'll put a plug in here that if you are in a county that does not have a station, but would like to have a station, our goal is to have at least one station in every county. The challenges are finding site hosts for a station, and then of course finding the funds for the station. So if you are talking to community folks or farmers or anything like that across your county, and you show off these maps and say, hey, wouldn't it be nice to have a station here in our county? Let's talk. Help certainly bring me in if you'd like, and just start promoting this. We need to get the word out across the state. Moving on to the U.S. Drought Monitor, I love showing extraordinarily boring maps like this. And what this is saying when every county is white is we have no drought going on in the state, and we don't even have abnormally dry conditions, which would be denoted by a yellow shading. This is what was released last Thursday, though, for data through last Tuesday. You can see that in the upper right. So I have submitted the recommendations for this week based on your reports. And so far, my recommendations are to keep things status quo another week, just because it has been wet. However, if you disagree with that, you got to let me know, which brings me to the plug about the quiz. I try and send out emails on Fridays with a little bit of updates of what the climate and outlooks are looking like. Here's the map that I had pulled yesterday morning when preparing to talk to our state agency partners, such as Department of Natural Resources, Homeland Security, etc. And you can see those cities that have responded, but I also wanted to highlight that if you go to this product, let's say you're new to Extension, you're seeing these emails, but you don't quite understand what we're asking, at least just check out the website and get a feel for what are people saying, particularly on the table on the right. You can get a feel for when I'm looking for input on impacts, what are folks saying? And then this product, I apologize, it's a little fuzzy, but this is what I literally send to the national author. This is that single person that's aggregating everything across the country from individual states. It's either me or Austin that's sending our report. And you can see how I'm literally taking the map that is created from your surveys, and I'm calling out particular impact reports that you're saying. You can see I'm noting the date that you submitted your report and very critical information related to justifying it. Because what happens is they're just looking at the quantitative maps. They're looking at how much precipitation has fallen. Is it above or below normal? Do these quantitative observations look like we should have a drought or abnormally dry or not? And so it means a lot to them when they see products like this that I'm sending to them, where they're saying it's too wet to plant. We have ponding in the fields, the tiles are running, and they'll stop and they'll say, oh, okay, that must be different. And so you hopefully understand it's very important that we're as accurate as possible with that national U.S. drought monitor. All right, last couple slides. Just want to highlight what we're looking at. I pulled these just this morning. So this is the 7-day precipitation outlook, forecast, if you will. So this is for today through next Tuesday, approximately, or next Monday evening. You can see just more rain is on the way. Certainly for southern Indiana, we're looking at amounts over 3 inches, possibly even 4 inches in areas, but the northern half of the state isn't going to go dry. They just aren't going to get as much. As far as our climate outlooks are concerned, and outlooks are more probabilistic in nature, they more are indicating, are we looking at above or below normal conditions, and what level of confidence do we have with that above or below normal? So this particular product is showing for May 26th through 30th. You can see on the left, the temperature, we're slightly confident that temperatures will be above normal for this period. And for precipitation, we're a little bit more than slightly confident that precipitation amounts will be higher than normal. So the shading here is not indicating how much above normal. It's just indicating our level of confidence that the amounts or the degrees will be above normal. This is the 8 to 14 day temperature and precipitation outlook, thankfully, at least for me. It looks like they're predicting confidence that conditions should be near normal for that period of time. And as represented at the top of the slide, we're talking May 28th through June 3rd. So precipitation should be near normal. Temperatures should be normal, with the southern, southwestern part of Indiana favoring maybe below normal conditions for that time of year. Last Thursday, the monthly and seasonal outlooks were released. So same concept in the shading. There's no guidance on temperature. In this case, it's just because it's white, it's not saying that temperatures should be near normal. What these particular products are saying is when they ran, say, 100 different models, there was nothing that favored one way or the other. So yeah, I don't want you to look at that temperature product and think, oh, temperatures should be near normal. It's like, nope, the models just were all over the place. In contrast, in the precipitation outlook, you see the shading is favoring above normal precipitation, certainly for the bottom 2/3 or the southern 2/3 of Indiana, with increasing confidence that precipitation will be above normal in the southern third of the state. And then finally, my last slide is the 3-month June, July, August outlook. Again, we're favoring above normal temperatures. That seems to be the trend, like every seasonal product, pretty much every monthly product, except for perhaps the one I just showed, just because of our global temperature trends. Precipitation, though, just a slight favoring above normal. So again, as those of you have pointed out, yes, it's been wet in certain areas of the state, but it could turn fairly quickly. We are not at all protected from a flash drought condition occurring, or more appropriately said, a rapid intensifying drought to occur over our growing season, but we also are susceptible to heavy rainfall events. So again, that's my last slide. I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Do we have any questions for Beth? Thank you, Beth. I appreciate what you and Austin do. It's always good to have you guys on board. So I think next up, I see John Bonkowski is on from the Diagnostic Lab. John, anything going on in the lab you want to share?
Nope. At the moment, everything's pretty slow on the agronomic front, which is a great thing for me, but we have plenty of ornamentals in. So I would just say keep an eye out for any of the seedling disease problems, especially because it's been so wet and rainy. But yeah, everything's slow for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes this crop and weather update for May 21st, 2024. We hope you found it valuable and will tune back in for future updates from Purdue University Extension.